The Vietnam War and the Pentagon Papers. The Vietnam War is also known by the name of the Second Indochina War, and it spanned of the years of 1954 to 1975, coming second in length only to the war in Afghanistan. In this war, Vietnam comprises of two parts, North Vietnam and South Vietnam, and much like the Korean War, the South is backed by the Democratic United States, while the North is backed by Communist Soviet Union, China, and other communist allies. All in all, this war was fought because many anti-communist countries believed in the domino effect, where if one smaller South Asian country fell to communism, then all of them would soon follow. During World War II, Japan occupied parts of Vietnam, and with France colonization still present, Ho Chi Minh decided to create the Viet Minh, otherwise known as the League for the Independence of Vietnam. This was formed to kick out both of these countries and ultimately get Vietnamese independence. Japan recedes after they lose the war, and France backs up the South Vietnamese Emperor Bao Dai. When the Viet Minh rise up and take the northern city of Hanoi, they declare their new country, the Democratic Republic of Vietnam, with Ho Chi Minh as president. In 1954, the United States became present after France was ejected by the Viet Minh forces. In July of that same year, the Geneva Conference was held where the French promised to completely remove all of their troops, and that South Vietnam and North Vietnam would be divided along the 19 degrees north latitude, otherwise known as the 17th parallel. After this, Emperor Bao gets pushed aside, and Ngo Dinh Diem becomes the president of South Vietnam, and he pushes his intensely anti-communist movement. President Eisenhower writes to Diem and promises equipment from the United States military and the CIA. The Gulf of Tonkin is what truly sparked United States military involvement. While the U.S. had been in the war since 1954, it was mostly equipment that was given, not troops. In 1964, 2 United States destroyers were in the Gulf of Tonkin in order to conduct reconnaissance and intercept North Vietnamese communication, when suddenly they got torpedoed, effectively maddening the United States and President Johnson, who approved strikes on North Vietnamese naval bases almost immediately. Soon after, Nixon became president, and he began Vietnamization, withdrawing troops and increased aerial and artillery bombardment, giving the South Vietnamese more training and weapons that they needed to fight the war on the ground. The Paris Peace Accords was a treaty to end the war and restore the peace in Vietnam, where the United States had to remove all troops and bases, and the North Vietnamese would release all United States prisoners of war. Soon after this treaty was signed, North and South Vietnam combined once again into the Socialist Republic of Vietnam. Protests of the war sprouted in not only cities across America, but also colleges, such as the University of Wisconsin, University of California at Berkeley, University of Chicago, Cornell, and even Harvard. Most of them protested the war itself and how many troops we as the United States were sending over in a conflict that seemingly had nothing to do with us. With new technology there wasn't before, TVs now broadcasted the horrors of war. It reduced the space between the battlefront and the average American citizen, causing people to get angry that this is what we were doing with our time and resources. People were also protesting the draft, because men who didn't want to fight were being drafted into a war where if we just stopped fighting there would be seemingly no repercussions. During one of these protests at Kent State, the Ohio National Guard was sent to keep the peace after police cars were supposedly hit with beer bottles and the ROTC building set on fire. But the next day, in a shocking turn of events, 4 unarmed students were shot and killed and 9 more wounded by the National Guard. After this event, it caused a tidal wave of protests at over 1,300 colleges across the United States. The Pentagon Papers, otherwise known as the Top Secret Department of Defense study of U.S. political and military involvement in Vietnam from 1945 to 1967. Robert McNamara, the U.S. Secretary of Defense, commissioned the papers for future historians and policymakers to stop errors in the future. These documents held top-secret classified material from the archives, the Department of Defense, the State Department, and the CIA, outlining everything good and bad about the United States' involvement in the Vietnam War from the end of World War II until 1967. The papers themselves had 47 volumes and were completed in 1969 with 3,000 pages of narrative and 4,000 pages of supporting documents. Parts of them were leaked in 1971 by Daniel Ellsberg with the help of Anthony Russo Jr. In 2011, on the 40th anniversary of the leak, the full papers were released to the public. These papers talked about the involvement of many presidents such as Truman, Eisenhower, Kennedy, Johnson, and Nixon during the Vietnam War, and the damning evidence against them such as during the Kennedy administration, when the government had actively helped to overthrow and assassinate the South Vietnamese president Ngo Dinh Diem in 1963. These papers also contradicted official United States pronouncements about the intensive bombings of North Vietnam and of both Laos and Cambodia to try and take out North Vietnamese trails and supply lines. This brings us to the question: how did the releasing of the Pentagon Papers instill distrust in the United States government? Daniel Ellsberg was born in Chicago, Illinois in April of 1931. He was a military analyst and researcher and got a PhD from Harvard in economics. Ellsberg worked for RAND, a research and analysis company that provides information to the government itself and is financed by universities, individual people, companies, and the government. After leaving RAND, he worked for the Department of Defense in 1964, where he spent his time analyzing the expanding United States military war effort. And the next year, he was transferred to the State Department and was sent to the U.S. Embassy in Saigon, where he accompanied troops to evaluate the war, and from what he saw, he reached an opinion that the war was unwinnable. In 1967, he rejoined RAND, where the Pentagon Papers strengthened his opinion about the war. In 1969, he began photocopying the papers, and for the next 18 months, he offered the papers to Congress members, but all of them refused to bring it up in any official meetings. In 1970, he left RAND for the Massachusetts Institute of Technology, and inspired by the expansion of the war into Cambodia and Laos, he leaked portions of the paper to the New York Times. Ellsberg talked to Cornelius Shion, who was a journalist and reporter to the New York Times, and they both agreed that this information needed to be known by the general public. So, in a series of articles, Shion released parts of the papers. Due to the papers coming directly from the Pentagon itself, the media quickly came up with the name the Pentagon Papers, and since then that name has stuck. Because of this leak, many lawsuits emerged as well as protests, causing even the most docile of Americans to get fired up about the government. The United States sued the New York Post, effectively stopping publication of the papers, but other news outlets such as the Washington Post and the Boston Globe continued publishing. After the first 3 installments in the New York Times, President Nixon immediately obtained a restraining order stopping the publication. The New York Times appealed to the Supreme Court, and the court agreed to hear the case the next day, where they ruled 6-3 that the Times can continue to publish the papers. The Nixon administration claimed that it was in direct violation of the Espionage Act, which prohibits obtaining information, recordings, pictures, or copying descriptions relating to the national defense, that the information may be used for the injury of the United States or to the advantage of any foreign nation. But the court claimed that it was a violation of the First Amendment to stop the publication, and that it would not put the United States in danger, but that it would actually educate the American people about the war itself. Supreme Court Justice Hugo L. Black said in support of the case ruling and the First Amendment, "Only a free and unrestrained press can effectively expose deception in the government." After losing the lawsuit against the Times, the Nixon administration quickly pivoted their wrath towards Daniel Ellsberg and his co-conspirators. Before the Supreme Court even came to their decision, Ellsberg said, "I felt that as an American citizen, as a responsible citizen, I could no longer cooperate in concealing this information from the American public. I did this clearly at my own jeopardy, and I was prepared to answer to all the consequences of this decision." In other words, he is saying that he was not sorry that he had released papers, and that it truly was his duty as an American to do it. During his trial, he was charged with conspiracy and, like the Times, for violating the Espionage Act of 1917. In the end, Ellsberg would have had to serve 115 years in prison as his max sentence. That is, until the Plumbers came in. They were a secret White House group during Nixon's presidency who were tasked with finding out classified information. The Plumbers burglarized the office of Ellsberg's psychiatrist in September of 1971, and the FBI had also recorded many conversations between Ellsberg and a former National Security Council member without a court order. The court cited government misconduct, and the judge dismissed Ellsberg of all charges in May of 1973. These events had many impacts on the world as we know it. First of all, it was a landmark First Amendment decision, where if the First Amendment is needed in another case, the courts can cite this to continue their argument. Another thing is the War Powers Act of 1973, where federal law is intended to check the United States President's power and to commit the U.S. to an armed conflict without the consent of Congress. It solidified the need of the American people to know what was going on during war times. It also proves that we, as the American people, can make a change in policy and to stop government corruption. In the end, these events solidified the distrust of the United States government because a majority of people were shown the war and what was happening, but in reality, they were not shown what was happening behind the scenes. They were being blatantly lied to, and on top of the lies the American people were being fed, once the papers were released, they realized that it wasn't just one corrupt president or one corrupt cabinet member. It was 5 different presidents. And in the end, this instilled distrust in the government. And here are our sources.